The storm rolled in without warning, a white wall swallowing the northern pass in less than an hour. One moment the mountain road was merely treacherous, slick with sleet and edged by frozen cliffs. The next it was a howling void of ice and wind that erased tracks as soon as they were made. I should have turned back. Any sensible traveler would have. But the supply caravan I'd been repairing had already retreated downslope, and I'd stayed behind to secure a snapped axle bracket near the ridge. By the time I packed my tools, the world had vanished into snow. That was when I heard it. Not the wind. Not the groaning of ice shifting along stone. Something thinner, higher. A broken sound that didn't belong to the mountain. A cry. I followed it against better judgment, boots sinking into drifts that climbed past my knees. The sound came from beyond the guard markers, dangerously close to the cliff's edge where wind currents carved hollows into the rock face. I almost missed the opening entirely, a shallow depression in the stone partially sealed by wind-packed snow. The cry came again, weaker this time. I dropped to my knees and started digging with gloved hands, clearing ice away from the hollow. Beneath the crusted layer, warmth brushed my skin. Faint, fading. I brushed aside the last of the snow and froze. 3 dragon hatchlings lay tangled together in the depression, their small bodies dusted white with frost. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Their scales were dulled by cold, colors muted under ice crystals. One was deep crimson beneath the frost, another ash gray, and the smallest a pale blue that almost blended with the snow itself. Their wings were tucked tight, brittle-looking, and their breath came in shallow, misting puffs that barely lingered before being stolen by the wind. Abandoned, or lost, it didn't matter which. They would not survive another hour out here. Easy, I muttered, though they were too weak to resist. The crimson hatchling stirred faintly as I lifted him. His body was cold, dangerously cold, but not stiff. Not yet. I shrugged off my outer thermal cloak and wrapped all 3 of them together inside it, pressing them against my chest beneath my coat. Their scales were smoother than I expected, fragile in a way dragons rarely appeared. I don't know who left you, I said through chattering teeth. Turning back toward the road I could barely see anymore. But you're not freezing here. The wind fought every step. Twice I nearly lost my footing near the ridge curve. The smallest hatchling gave another weak sound, more vibration than voice, and I tightened my hold instinctively. I wasn't thinking about dragon politics or territorial consequences. I was thinking about heat, about distance, about survival. The caravan outpost sat 2 miles downslope, a reinforced stone shelter used by traders during bad weather. When I stumbled through its doors nearly 40 minutes later, coated in ice and breathless, the stable master swore loudly at the sight of the bundle in my arms. "Are you insane?" he demanded. "Those are dragon young. They're freezing," I shot back. "Get the furnace roaring." He hesitated only a second before barking orders at his assistants. Blankets were thrown down near the central hearth. I lowered the hatchlings carefully, peeling back the frozen cloak. Frost cracked softly as it separated from their scales. The pale blue one barely moved. Panic tried to rise in my throat. I swallowed it down. Panic wastes heat. Slow warming, I instructed, remembering old wilderness survival training. Not direct flame. We positioned them near, but not too near, the furnace. I removed my gloves and pressed my hands gently along the crimson hatchling's side, encouraging circulation. The ash-gray one coughed weakly, a thin thread of smoke slipping from his nostrils. "That's good," I murmured. "That's good." The pale blue hatchling didn't respond. I shifted closer and cupped his small head carefully. His scales were the coldest of the 3, almost translucent under frost. I leaned down, letting my breath warm him gradually rather than blasting heat too fast. "Come on," I whispered. "You're not done." Minutes stretched painfully. The storm howled outside the stone walls, but inside the furnace heat began seeping into the room. The crimson hatchling stirred first, claws twitching. Then the ash-gray one shifted, wings trembling slightly as warmth reached muscle and bone. Finally, so faint I almost imagined it, The pale blue one exhaled a thin puff of icy mist that sparkled briefly in the firelight. Not smoke. Not flame. Something colder. Relief hit me so hard I had to sit back. "They're stabilizing," the stable master muttered, half in disbelief. "You've tied yourself to dragon business now." I looked at the 3 small forms curled together near the hearth. "I tied myself to not letting them die," I replied. An hour later, their breathing deepened. The crimson one lifted his head shakily, blinking golden eyes at the unfamiliar stone ceiling. When he noticed me sitting nearby, he tensed weakly. "You're safe," I said quietly. The ash-gray hatchling pushed himself upright next, wobbling but alert. His gaze moved from the furnace to the door to me, assessing. The pale blue one remained still longer than the others, but when his eyes finally opened, they were not gold or amber. They were silver, reflective, ancient-looking in a way that didn't match his size. He stared at me without blinking. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but something in the air inside the outpost shifted. Not threatening, not yet, just aware. The crimson hatchling made a small sound toward the pale blue one, and the silver-eyed hatchling responded with a faint pulse of cold that frosted the edge of a nearby water bucket. The temperature in the room dipped briefly before stabilizing. The stable master took a cautious step back. "That one's different." I didn't argue. I could feel it too. Not danger exactly. Potential. The pale blue hatchling's gaze never left mine. "You're welcome," I said softly, not entirely sure why I felt compelled to say it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the smallest hatchling dragged himself forward across the stone and pressed his cold forehead against my boot. The contact was brief, light, but it sent a sudden warmth. Not heat, but something deeper, up through my leg and into my chest. Not painful, not overwhelming, just unmistakable. The bond formed in silence. I had saved them from freezing. I hadn't expected to save myself from walking away unchanged. The warmth didn't fade when I stepped back. It lingered beneath my ribs like an ember that refused to cool, subtle but steady. I told myself it was adrenaline, relief, exhaustion from fighting the storm. But when the pale blue hatchling lifted his silver eyes toward me again, I felt it pulse, faint, responsive. The stable master noticed the way I stiffened. "What did it do?" he asked cautiously. "Nothing," I replied automatically. Then, after a pause, "I think." The crimson hatchling had regained enough strength to sit upright, wings drooping but no longer brittle with frost. He watched the pale blue one with clear deference, as if instinctively aware of something unusual about him. The ash-gray hatchling, quieter and sharper-eyed, shifted closer to form a protective triangle around the smallest of them. They weren't random strays. They were a clutch. And if they were a clutch, someone would eventually come looking. "Storm will clear by dawn," the stable master muttered. "If a brood patrol finds them here." "I'm aware," I said. Dragon law wasn't written in city books, but everyone near the northern territories understood it. Hatchlings belonged to broods. Broods belonged to bloodlines. Interference, especially human interference, could be interpreted as theft. I studied the 3 of them carefully. None wore crest markings indicating high lineage. No metal bands or sigil etchings along the horn ridges. Their scales, though vibrant beneath thawing frost, bore no ceremonial identification. "Maybe they weren't meant to be found," the stable master said quietly. I didn't like the implication. Neither did the crimson hatchling, judging by the low, uncertain rumble vibrating in his chest. The pale blue one remained silent, gaze never straying far from me. Every few seconds, that strange internal warmth stirred again, like a pulse answering his breathing. "You did something," the stable master insisted. "I warmed them," I replied. "No, the small one touched you." I glanced down at my boot where the contact had happened. There was no mark, no visible change. But when I flexed my hand, the faintest trace of cold mist curled briefly around my fingers before vanishing. I froze. The ash-gray hatchling noticed immediately, his head tilted, nostrils flaring. The pale blue one gave the softest sound, a whisper of frost against stone, and the air near the hearth shimmered faintly. Not enough to extinguish the fire, just enough to remind the room that warmth wasn't the only force present. The stablemaster took another step back. "You're linked," he breathed. "I don't even know what that means," I muttered. But deep down I did. Legends along the northern trade route spoke of rare cross-species bonds, ancient, unpredictable, not fully understood even by dragons. Bonds formed not through ritual but through survival, through shared threshold moments between life and death. Most dismissed those stories as exaggeration, convenient myths to explain unlikely alliances. Yet as the pale blue hatchling slowly climbed into my lap, uninvited but not unwelcome, the warmth in my chest steadied into something unmistakable. Not control, not ownership, recognition. The crimson hatchling gave a questioning chirp. "He's not taking your place?" I murmured gently, unsure why I felt compelled to reassure them. The ash-gray one approached cautiously and nudged the pale blue hatchling's shoulder before settling beside us. Outside, the storm began to weaken, wind shifting from violent howl to steady gust. Dawn wasn't far. "We need to decide before patrol routes resume," the stablemaster said. "If their brood abandoned them, they won't admit it. And if they didn't, they'll assume I stole them," I finished. The crimson hatchling struggled upright and staggered toward the outpost door, peering through a narrow window slit at the fading storm. His posture was tense, not fearful but alert. "They're waiting," the stablemaster whispered suddenly. My pulse jumped. "What?" He pointed toward the ridge beyond the outpost. Through thinning snowfall, massive silhouettes moved along the cliff line. 3. No 4. Dragon Patrol. The crimson hatchling froze. The ash-gray one lowered his body instinctively, wings partially shielding the pale blue. The smallest hatchling remained in my lap, silver eyes fixed not on the approaching shapes, but on me. The warmth in my chest flared slightly. "They're coming," I said quietly. The stablemaster swore under his breath. "You can't outrun them." "I'm not going to." The hatchlings looked up at me all at once. "If I hide you, they'll assume guilt," I continued calmly. "If I run, they'll chase. We face this." The crimson hatchling hesitated, then stepped closer, not retreating, not panicking. The ash-gray one followed. The pale blue hatchling's small claws tightened briefly against my coat. "I won't let them take you somewhere you'll freeze again," I murmured softly. The outpost doors shuddered under a heavy knock. No, not a knock. A measured strike of talon against reinforced wood. The stablemaster swallowed hard and opened them. Cold air flooded in, along with towering presence. The lead dragon lowered her massive head into the doorway, scales dark as storm clouds, eyes sharp and assessing. Her gaze swept the room and stopped on the 3 hatchlings. "They were reported lost in the storm," she said evenly. "Lost, not abandoned." The crimson hatchling took one step forward, uncertain. The ash-gray one mirrored him. The pale blue hatchling remained pressed against me. The lead dragon's eyes shifted slowly to me. "You interfered." "I rescued," I corrected. A tense silence followed. The other patrol dragons shifted behind her, wings folding with controlled precision. "They would have perished," I continued, voice steady. "Hypothermia onset within minutes." The lead dragon's gaze dropped briefly to the pale blue hatchling. Something unreadable flickered across her expression. Then she looked back at me and narrowed her eyes slightly. "You are marked." I stiffened. "Marked?" She gestured subtly with her snout. I glanced down at my forearm, and my breath caught. A faint silver pattern shimmered beneath my skin, tracing lines like frost veins branching outward from where the smallest hatchling's forehead had touched my boot. The pale blue hatchling shifted in my lap. The warmth in my chest pulsed in response. The lead dragon exhaled slowly. Not smoke, not flame, cold vapor. "The bond has formed," she said. The stablemaster made a strangled sound behind me. I swallowed. "I didn't ask for it." "Bonds are not requested," she replied calmly. "They are recognized." The crimson hatchling stepped closer to her, giving a small, uncertain chirp. The ash-gray one followed. But the pale blue hatchling did not move. He stayed exactly where he was. With me. The lead dragon studied that carefully. Not anger. Not accusation. Assessment. The storm did not choose lightly, she murmured. I had no idea what that meant. But as the silver mark beneath my skin pulsed once more in quiet synchronization with the smallest hatchling's breathing, I understood one thing clearly. Saving them from freezing had been simple. What followed would not be. The patrol dragons did not leave immediately. They remained outside the outpost as dawn bled pale gold across the snowfields, their immense silhouettes half hidden in drifting mist while the lead dragon studied the silver mark spreading faintly along my forearm. It did not burn, did not sting. Yet it felt alive, as though something ancient had settled beneath my skin and was quietly learning the rhythm of my pulse. The pale blue hatchling shifted in my arms, pressing closer, and the warmth in my chest answered him again. Steady and deliberate now, no longer an accident. The crimson hatchling stood near the doorway, glancing between the patrol and me, torn between instinct and loyalty, while the ash-gray one observed everything with sharp, calculating stillness. Explain, I said finally, my voice low but firm. The lead dragon lowered herself slightly, not submissive, but respectful of confined space. The smallest of this clutch carries a dormant lineage trait, she replied. Rare, old. It binds not through dominance, but through preservation. When death approaches and another life intervenes without claim or command, the bond may awaken. I stared at her. You're saying saving him triggered it? No, she corrected. Choosing him did. That unsettled me more than the mark itself. I hadn't chosen one over the others. I'd chosen survival. But perhaps that was enough. The pale blue hatchling lifted his head and gave a soft chime-like sound, and frost briefly traced the edge of my sleeve before dissolving harmlessly. The lead dragon's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. He anchored to you, she said, and you did not reject him. Reject him? The idea felt absurd. The crimson hatchling edged closer to the patrol dragon, brushing her foreleg hesitantly. She acknowledged him with a gentle rumble, then looked back at me. The other two will return with us, she continued. They are strong enough now. The ash-gray hatchling gave no protest, though his gaze lingered on the pale blue one. The crimson hatchling hesitated longer, then gave a small, reluctant chirp toward his smallest sibling. What followed surprised all of us. The pale blue hatchling carefully climbed down from my arms and waddled toward them, touching his forehead briefly to each of theirs. Frost shimmered faintly where contact was made, like a blessing or a promise. Then he turned back and returned to me without hesitation. The decision had already been made. Is this permanent? I asked quietly. Bonds of this kind are not temporary conveniences, the lead dragon replied. They are life threads. If severed unnaturally, both ends suffer. A chill unrelated to the storm crept through me. So what happens now? She studied me for a long moment before answering. Now you are responsible. The word settled heavily but not unwelcome. Responsibility I understood. I had lived my life repairing what others discarded, fixing mechanisms deemed beyond salvage. This was simply different, larger, breathing. The patrol dragons shifted, preparing to depart. The crimson and ash-gray hatchlings followed the lead dragon to the threshold, pausing only once to glance back. I met their eyes and gave a small nod. They would survive. They had strength and lineage and sky. The pale blue hatchling remained pressed against my leg as the patrol took flight, their wings carving powerful arcs through the thinning clouds. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. The stablemaster exhaled shakily. You just became part of something ancient, he muttered. I just kept 3 creatures from freezing, I replied, though the silver mark pulsing faintly beneath my skin told me that explanation was no longer sufficient. I crouched and looked directly at the pale blue hatchling. Up close, I noticed subtle patterns in his scales, fine crystalline veins like frost trapped in glass. Do you have a name? I asked softly. He tilted his head. A faint whisper of cold brushed my cheek. Not hostile, not biting. gentle. I smiled despite myself. We'll figure that out, I murmured. Outside, the storm had fully broken. Sunlight stretched across endless snow, turning the world blinding white and impossibly vast. The hatchling took a tentative step beyond the outpost door, blinking at the brightness, then looked back at me as if ensuring I followed. The warmth in my chest pulsed again. Stronger now, synchronized. This wasn't ownership. It wasn't captivity. It was alignment. You can't stay in an outpost forever, the stablemaster warned. Patrol accepted it, but others may not. I knew he was right. Word would spread. A human bonded to a dragon hatchling, especially one of rare lineage, would draw attention from factions who valued power over preservation. I rested a hand gently against the hatchling's neck. His scales were cool but not painfully so. Then we move, I said simply. The stablemaster blinked. Move where? I looked toward the northern horizon, where mountains cut jagged lines into the sky. Somewhere no one freezes alone, I replied. The hatchling gave a soft, approving chime, and a thin ribbon of frost curled playfully around my wrist before fading. For the first time since the storm began, I allowed myself a steady breath. I hadn't sought this bond. I hadn't asked for ancient lineage or life threads or responsibility beyond my own survival. But when a freezing creature had pressed close in the dark, I had answered. And in doing so, something older than either of us had answered back. The snow beneath our feet glittered as we stepped forward together. One human, one dragon hatchling. Bound not by command or conquest, but by a simple choice made in a storm. No one would be left to freeze if I could reach them. We did not get far before the world reminded us that ancient bonds rarely go unnoticed. By midday, as the storm's last remnants dissolved into pale blue sky, the silver mark along my forearm had spread into a delicate lattice of frost-like lines that shimmered faintly whenever the hatchling, who now walked steadily at my side, grew anxious or curious. The warmth in my chest had stabilized into something constant, no longer flaring unpredictably but humming like a quiet forge. We followed the old supply trail north, away from the outpost and trade routes, toward the mountain valleys where fewer eyes watched and fewer laws pressed in. The pale blue hatchling moved carefully through the snow, occasionally glancing up to ensure I remained close, and each time our gazes met, that invisible thread between us tightened. Not restrictive, but reassuring. I had just begun considering where we might find long-term shelter when the air shifted. Birds that had cautiously returned after the storm took sudden flight. The hatchling froze mid-step. A ripple of unease pulsed through my chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness. We were no longer alone. They descended without warning. Not patrol dragons this time, but three lean figures clad in scaled armor shaped from shed dragon plates, their cloaks stitched with sigils that glinted unnaturally in the sun. Dragon binders. I recognized the insignia from whispered market rumors. Mercenaries who exploited rare bonds, capturing bonded pairs to weaponize or dissect the connection. Their leader, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and a scar crossing one eye, studied the mark on my arm with open interest. Well, she said coolly, the stories were true. The hatchling pressed against my leg, small body trembling. Not from cold, but from instinctive recognition of threat. The warmth inside me flared in response, and frost crept outward from my boots in a thin defensive circle. The binders noticed immediately. Controlled manifestation already. One of them murmured, "Impressive." I stepped forward, placing myself fully between them and the hatchling. "We're not part of your collections," I said evenly. The scarred woman smiled faintly. "You misunderstand. You're an opportunity." The moment one of them reached for a binding rod strapped to his back, something ancient answered through the silver lattice in my skin. It wasn't conscious thought, it was reflex. The warmth surged, but instead of heat, it manifested as balance. The frost at my feet hardened instantly into crystalline ridges, forcing the approaching binder to stumble. At the same time, the hatchling lifted his head and released a focused burst of shimmering cold. Not wild, not destructive, but precise. Ice formed along the binding rod's metal shaft, freezing its mechanism solid before it could deploy. The mercenaries reacted quickly, drawing curved blades treated to resist elemental interference. But they hesitated. They hadn't expected coordination. The scarred leader's expression shifted from amusement to calculation. "He's synchronizing with you," she observed quietly. "That shouldn't be possible at this developmental stage." I didn't fully understand what we were doing either, only that every movement I made seemed anticipated by the hatchling, and every instinct of his fed into mine. When I shifted left, he adjusted right, forming a natural flanking angle without instruction. When one binder attempted to circle behind us, the hatchling pivoted first, releasing another controlled burst that coated the snow into blinding reflective shards. The fight never became a clash of brute force. It became a demonstration. Each attempt to separate us resulted in sharper, cleaner responses, not chaotic power but alignment. The silver mark along my arm brightened visibly now, not painfully but unmistakably, and I felt the hatchling's pulse echo through it like a second heartbeat. Finally, when the scarred woman realized escalation would only prove the bond's potential further, she raised a hand. Her companions stepped back. "Enough," she said. The snow between us glittered with fractured ice and frozen steel. She studied us one final time, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "This will draw attention far beyond mercenaries," she warned. "You won't be left alone." "We're not looking to be," I replied calmly. "We're looking to live." Something unreadable flickered in her gaze. Perhaps respect, perhaps reconsideration. Without another word, she signaled retreat. Within moments, they vanished beyond the ridge, leaving only disturbed snow and silence behind. The hatchling sagged slightly against my leg once they were gone. I knelt immediately, checking him for injury. There was none, only fatigue. The silver lattice along my arm dimmed back to its softer shimmer, and the warmth in my chest steadied again, no longer surging. "You did well," I whispered. He gave a faint, musical chime in response and gently pressed his forehead against my wrist. This time not triggering a new bond, but reinforcing the one already formed. I understood then what the patrol dragon had meant. This was not dominance. It was not ownership. It was partnership born at the edge of death and tempered through choice. As the sun dipped lower and cast long blue shadows across the mountains, I looked toward a distant valley partially sheltered by stone cliffs and evergreen forest. Smoke curled faintly from somewhere deep within, evidence of settlement, perhaps small, perhaps cautious. "That's where we'll go," I said softly. The hatchling followed my gaze and gave a quiet, approving rumble. We stepped forward together once more, no longer merely survivor and rescued, but something rarer. Two lives aligned by storm, tested by threat, and strengthened by refusal to yield. The world would indeed take notice, but it would learn something important in doing so. Bonds forged in compassion are far harder to break than those forced by power.